Welcome back to the series of lectures on English language and literature. As you are aware, these lectures are being brought to you by NPTEL, the National Program on Technology Enhanced Learning, and these are brought to you by the Indian Institutes of Technology and the Indian Institute of Science. Our course is entitled English Language and Literature, and we are in the second lecture of this series. In the first lecture, well, let us do a recap. In the first lecture, we began by talking about the aims, okay, and the scope of our course. Okay. As declared in our the course syllabus in the website, this course seeks to impart in both a compact and comprehensive manner the necessary knowledge in English language and literature that an undergraduate student should possess. The course aims to help students understand English language and literature using a multifaceted methodology that includes the historical, the linguistic, literary and the critical dimensions, right. So, we also looked in detail at the course structure, and we found that in the first module we talk about a certain newer issues that have come up. For instance, we as in today's lecture for instance, which is devoted to the scope of English studies. Then for instance, international English, the globalization of English, the rise of cultural studies and how it has impacted the study of English language and literature, how it was partly responsible in the rise of what today we call English studies, right. Then we saw that in the second module, we are going to talk largely about language and particularly the history of the English language, and which we divided into Old English, Middle English, Early Modern English, Modern English and ending with English in India. Then we saw that in the third module we would talk about the different the so called periods or the different ages in English, in the history of English literature. Okay. So, the previous module was on the history of English language. The third module excuse me, would talk about English literature in its different phases or in its different ages or periods. For instance, we talk about the age of Chaucer, that of Milton, the Augustines, Victorian English, and ending again with Indian writing in English. Further, we saw that the next module is devoted, module 4 is devoted exclusively to genres, and in which we talk about certain aspects and certain key important works as far as for instance the novel is concerned, as far as poetry, autobiography, etc. are concerned. And finally, we move on to pretty detailed discussion, okay, of another important aspect of the study of English language and literature and of English studies, and this is the this is the various critical approaches that are there in the study of literary and language texts, and among them the important one, we have tried to sort of talk about as many as possible. This of course is again as I said in the last lecture, not an exhaustive list, and we talk about neo-historicism, Marxism, feminism, eco-criticism, post-colonialism, cognitivism, etc. Okay. So, we found in the last lecture that our effort has been to talk about the study of English language and literature and what goes on in the different approaches to the study of English language and literature, and we've tried to make it as varied as possible. By no means, of course, is this the course. This is also not really English 101. Okay, there is more packed into this, and in certain cases you may have, say, electives, say only on something like this, say on English theory, literary theory, sorry, and literary criticism. For instance, you could have a whole course, an elective course on the novel, for instance. Okay, so what we have done, Professor Krishna Borwa and we have tried to sort of give you as far as possible, okay, an idea at least, okay, so that you are aware of the various ways or various things that entail in the teaching of English language and literature. Okay, though this lecture, the lecture 2, is devoted to showing you the aspects of what entails when we mean English studies. Even though we didn't really adopt that title for various reasons, we kept it partly sort of traditional. We move now to the whole topic of English studies, and the texts here that you may want to look up is, for instance, Smithson and Ruff's edited volume, English Studies / Culture Studies, Institutionalizing Dissent. Now, this very title of this book will give you an idea of how English studies really differs from English language and literature, because there is this whole question of dissent, this whole question of revising the canon, revising what goes into English language and literature. Okay, and you see the presence of culture studies. We have a whole lecture in this module, I think it's the last lecture in this module, devoted to the rise of cultural studies. Okay. So, English studies is impacted, so to speak, by the rise of culture studies or cultural studies, with the rise of ideology, by the rise of this impulse to revise. Okay. And this revise the curriculum, revise the syllabus, and this is also to do with obviously the spread of English language and literature beyond historically and contemporarily, beyond the boundaries of what is written. Okay. And another book which is both from the point of view of theory and practice is important here, is Rob Pope's The English Studies book. Okay, it's like a handbook of English studies. And the next, I refer also briefly, of course, to Macaulay's important Minute on Indian Education, because we also talk about English in India briefly, though there is another lecture on English in India in the second module. Then Gauri Vishwanathan's Masters of Conquest is something I refer to, but if you wish to have a resource page on English, the history of English studies, maybe you would do well to go to this website here mentioned here by Rita Rayleigh, and in this website, okay, you have a number of links that take you to important texts, okay, that would show you both historically and theoretically. Okay, many of the debates that inhere in the studying and teaching of English studies, not necessarily English language and literature. Okay, so to set the record straight, what I do here is, you will see when by the end of this lecture that even though this course is not entitled English language and literature, we've tried, except perhaps the proficiency part of it, the skill part of it, we've tried to we talk about world Englishes, about world literature, about as much as as far as possible, so to give this this course that we are bringing to you some sort of to accommodate the English studies approach to it also. Okay, so these are some of the texts, as I said, that you may want to look at. Now, this lecture is on the scope of English studies, and again there are many ways in which you can talk about the scope, and within the constraints of a single 40-minute or 50-minute lecture, I know that it's not possible for me to talk about or to bring to you so many different aspects, but let me say this. When you talk about the scope of English studies, and really the scope is growing, okay. It's becoming quite accommodating and commodious, if you will. The scope of English studies first necessarily needs to refer to the study of English literature, okay. Look at the slide please. It refers to literatures in English, English linguistics and English sociolinguistics, in the sense that even though the margins are being stretched, so to speak, even though there are so many other things that are being accommodated within this, we'll see a couple of comments that have been made, for instance by Rob Pope, about this whole plurality of this exercise. Nevertheless, you cannot do without talking about these three core aspects, okay. Literatures in English, English linguistics and English sociolinguistics, right. Fine. So, some of the other areas at least that may come into the rubric of English studies also they include, apart from the three main ones. Let us look at this slide please. Includes the study of the use of English in journalism, okay, the study of philosophy of language in general and as applied, okay, to the study of the English language and its variations and developments. It definitely includes the study of literary theory and criticism. Then the issue of creative writing is again a very important part of English studies. As we go on studying the development, the creative development of the English language, its development, growth and variation, as we see in creative writing, okay, as English is being written increasingly by second language speakers or people who writers whose native languages or mother tongue has not been English, okay. Similarly, in contemporary times, another emerging area of study in the scope of English studies is the whole idea of not traditional publishing, but publishing electronically, digital publishing, okay. The question of electronic texts, for instance, is also another the study of electronic texts and all issues relating to publishing, including the political, okay. These form an important part of at least contemporary English studies. And film and media and communication, these are also important areas of studying of exploring English studies. So, let us quickly look at it again. What is the scope of English studies? The scope of English studies is first, okay, the literatures in English, English linguistics and English sociolinguistics, in no particular order really here, and the others, as we saw, journalism, for instance, media and communication, film, creative writing, literary theory and criticism, study of aesthetics, the study of various schools and approaches to the literary text, okay. So, if one is to summarize, these are some of the things that you would talk about, but this again is not the whole story, okay. We need to recognize so many other aspects of the study of English as English studies, and as I had mentioned, which does not really fall in our course, okay, because again, as we said, since we kept it English language and literature, we thought that the study of proficiency, the whole issue of proficiency in in English studies, and for instance the use of English for special purposes, right, or for instance the use of English as a second language, right. These are certain issues. These have really become a part of a huge area of study, okay, which is the teaching, the English language teaching, English, again as I said, English as a second language, English as a third language, for instance. And as far as the proficiency is concerned, NPTEL has provided there are courses in, for instance, English in communication skills, courses on better English, etc., that you may take up, right. Now, if you recall, I had mentioned that Rob Pope's handbook on English studies is an important text, both from the theoretically and largely from the practical points of view. There are several texts there that are are analyzed, and it's really a rich book that I would recommend to you. Now let's look at what Rob Pope says here. Pope rightly points to what he calls the capacious subject matter. Okay, the capacious subject matter of English studies. That is, English studies can accommodates and continues to accommodate, rather than English, the English language, the more traditional English language and literature, okay, continues to be capacious, continues to accommodate so many areas, accommodate dissent, for instance, okay, and accommodate revisions of new envisioning of syllabi and curriculum. Second, he says that English studies also looks at the pedagogy, or education strategies, the science and art of teaching English language. It will question, it will critique, okay, it will critique and analyze the pedagogies that have been that are established in the teaching of English language and literature, with a view to revising and correcting some of the, what should we say, not really mistakes, maybe sorry, some of the established tendencies in the pedagogy of English language and literature teaching, right. And third, not the least, of course, he points to the tremendous interdisciplinarity of English studies, and I would hasten to say that this is something that you need to compare. However, compared to English language and literature, we would say that this is English studies is far more interdisciplinary. It is really talking about everything that that is involved when you talk about English, okay, not as a language, just as a language, but English in anything that entails sociolinguistics, for instance, right. What we call high theory, for instance, and down to the skills, down to the questions of proficiency, right. Now, this is again by Rob Pope, and I am quoting from his handbook. He plays on this. He says, when we talk about English studies, he says English is a fundamentally plural and constantly changing series of subjects. So, the plurality and the dynamism, okay, of the English part of it. Okay, so English is a fundamentally plural and constantly changing series of subjects. It often turns out to be they. So, the study, it is not in the singular, it is in the plural. Okay, so English studies is studying English in plural ways, okay, studying, taking into account and meeting, squaring up, so to speak, to its dynamism, and in realizing this, we talk about English studies. It is in the same spirit that many scholars have begun to talk about Englishes, okay, where this Englishes becomes a legitimate term. So, we no longer talk about English. So, in similar spirit, right, we talk about Englishes as far as languages are concerned in a more broad sense, in a broader sense really. English studies is follows the same spirit of understanding and appreciating, right, recognizing the plurality inherent in it. Okay. Now, if you look at the history of the study of English, you will find that it is rather different from the kind from the again the capaciousness of this subject as it exists today. Okay. So, if you go back to the England of the 19th century, you will realize that the study of English. So, when you say, for instance, when you say in India, for instance, say the Department of English. Okay. So, when you say the Department of English, what you expect first is of course that the department offers courses in English literature, right, and not necessarily in solely on English on English language or or linguistics, right. So, the first expectation is that there would be courses on Shakespeare, there would be courses on Chaucer, on on American English, for instance, on Indian English, for instance, right. But if you go back, the interesting, very interesting point is if you go back to the history, you will find that up to the 19th, I mean as late, relatively speaking here, as late as the 19th century, the study of English in the universities in England entailed not just the study of literature, but entailed studies. This happens more in in the beginning of the departments, study of oratory, the study of rhetoric, the study of grammar, philology and literature. So, there was more, in fact, we say in the beginning there was the onus was more on these areas, okay, in oratory, rhetoric, grammar and philology than on literature. And later on you will find some very interesting claims being made by critics on how really the study of literature, okay, the study of the literature of England was not so what should I say, not so core to the syllabus or syllabi in England than it was when it was introduced in India, for instance, and more about that when we talk about the work of Gauri Vishwanathan and the work for instance, when we look at Macaulay's Minute. Okay. So, so we find that the history up to the 19th century, there were changes, no doubt, but usually, or in the beginning at least, rhetoric, oratory and philology were more important, grammar were more important than the study of literature per se. Now, let us look at an early essay, okay, by J. M. Hart, published in PMLA. PMLA is publications of the Modern Language Association in the US, and it is considered one of the core journals in English literature. And this essay 1884 to 85 is by J. M. Hart, and it is it's entitled The College Course in English Literature, How It May Be Improved. Now, the reason why I am bringing this, and this I have found in Rayleigh's, if you remember, I mentioned Rita Rayleigh's resource in the net that you can look up, the college course in English literature and how it may be improved. Now, let us read this slowly and see how from the 19th century the whole idea of improving, so to speak, the college course in or syllabi in English literature has changed over the years. So, this is J. M. Hart. To my way of thinking, the study of English literature means the study of, look at this, the study of the great movement of English life and feeling. Okay? So, look at this onus, the great movement of English life and feeling. This kind of declaration is precisely what is queried, critiqued and sought to be revised, okay, by this domain called English studies, right. To my way of thinking, Hart says, the study of English literature means the study of the great movement of only one kind, the life of one people, okay, that is the English life and feeling as it is reflected in, look at this, the purest prose of, look at the words like great, purity, okay, as it is reflected in the purest prose of, again look at this, representative men. Now, these are the words, the greatness or for instance, these are the ideas that precisely are queried by English studies, the greatness of and purity, okay, of one way of life, right, given by quote unquote representative men. Okay. So, those men who have led their people's sympathies, the proper object of literary study in one word is to train us to read, to grasp an author's personality in all its bearings. Particularly this first part of the essay is something that is extremely telling when you look at how English, how the curriculum, the syllabus and the and the effort to improve the syllabus is finds its core claim or core core argument in these kinds of feelings or these kinds of claims, that it is the study of a particular kind of way of life or people by its representative men and women. Note of course men here, okay, men or its writers in its purest form. The rise of a polemical way of looking at life, okay, a philosophy, if you may say, of polemics, of difference, okay, of celebrating variation, that is cultural studies, has been also, I would say, very important in the growth and sustenance of what we call English studies. Okay. Cultural studies is an area of or is a discipline that celebrates difference, that queries epistemological claims, that queries dominant narratives, okay, that seeks to bring marginalized peoples and narratives to the fore. Okay. So, obviously, when we query English, when we query English, the syllabus of English language and literature, okay, culture studies becomes a methodological tool, okay, that enables you to or that gives you the terminology to query these essays such as these, for instance, essays like J. M. Hart's The College Course and how it may be improved. So, the coming of the growth of cultural studies, particularly I would say from even though you had writers bringing in that strain of argumentation before the 80s, but I would say from the 80s, okay, this new polemic has been not just in English studies, this new polemic has been extremely important in bringing in a note of dissent and bringing in a note of revising the need for relooking or taking a new look at all established knowledge domains. Okay. So, the rise of cultural studies, and I did mention I think Smithson and Ruff's book, right, edited volume, English studies / culture studies, something that you may look into, and some of the essays are what also forms the bulk of this lecture. I mentioned Gauri Vishwanathan, whose Masks of Conquest, based on her doctoral thesis, is again another important work that one uses to to analyze the English education in colonial India. Okay, and listen to this carefully. Let us read from her text, Masks of Conquest, and I shall explain it in a while. The amazingly young history of English literature as a subject of study. Okay, it's surprisingly, it's the study of English literature as a subject, that is in universities and colleges. This is something that we had mentioned just a while ago, and she calls it this amazingly young history, which means that the study of English literature as part of the syllabus, even in Britain, is relatively it has a relatively young history. Okay, it is less than 150 years old. this amazing young history is frequently noted, but less appreciated is another aspect of it. And what is it? Less appreciated is the irony that English literature appeared, and this is what, as I said, is a stunning claim, that English literature appeared as a subject in the curriculum of the colonies long before it was institutionalized in the home country. So, studying English literature as part of the curriculum was something that happened in the colonies, and if it happened in the colonies, then one has to look for the reasons as to why such a phenomenon would occur at all, why the study of one country's or one nation's literature, its formal study or as part of formal education begins elsewhere and not in its own land. So, this is a core issue that is taken up by Vishwanathan. Let me read it again. The amazingly young history of English literature as a subject of study is frequently noted, but less appreciated is the irony that English literature appeared as a subject in the curriculum of the colonies long before it was institutionalized in the home country, that is England. Further, she says, when the classical curriculum still reigned supreme in England, despite the strenuous efforts of some concerned critics to loosen its hold, English as the study of culture and not simply the study of language. Look at this, English as the study of culture. Here culture means way of life, or ways of life, fine. So, English as a study of culture and not simply a question of philology or of grammar or of rhetoric, right. English as a study of culture and not simply as a study of the English language had already found a secure place in the British Indian curriculum. So, the change happens not in the home country, and it says here when the classical curriculum still reigns supreme in England, right. The change, however, happened in British Indian curriculum. Further, the circumstances of its ascendancy are what this book is immediately concerned with, that is Masks of Conquest. Its prime concern is on this particular phenomenon, that is British Indian curriculum or curricula in India, and the very interesting and important, say, political phenomenon of beginning to teach or include English literary texts in education in India. And this book also simultaneously draws attention to the subsequent look at this word, institutionalization and ideological content of the discipline in England as it developed in the colonial context. Do you follow? This is what really we call a contrapuntal method, perhaps I can use a word here, looking at it parallelly. The growth of English, the establishment or the introduction and subsequent establishment of English literary studies in colonial India, and of course, the changes that took place in the discipline in England, in the home country, as it began to develop in the colonial context. So, this kind of thing this kind of analysis is heartily welcomed by English studies. Fine. Again, going back to English studies / culture studies edited by Smithson and Ruff, you find that in they too talk about not just a language, that is English, not just a literary text, but they say that English studies, particularly as it is informed by culture studies, needs to look at the interrelationship between or among different domains which have perhaps hitherto been looked at sort of in an insular sort of way, in a discrete sort of way. So, the coming in of English studies following the cultural studies impact or influence, is that we now study the relations among diverse aspects or facets, that is relations between language, the text, cultures, readers and writers. So, this is really a whole whole circuit here you find, in which all these are related to one another in different ways. Okay. So, you do not study the English language without looking at the cultures under which such a language developed, right, or the variations or the changes over the years, historical changes developed. Okay. You do not look at the text without looking at the positionality and the condition of the reader, the historical, cultural, socioeconomic condition of the reader. Do you understand? Okay. So, it is safe to say here that hitherto discrete, for instance, philology, okay, rhetoric, literature, these were more or less taught in a discrete manner, in an insular manner, right. Now becomes, okay, because again remember, because of the ideology of cultural studies begins to be looked at in a more interdisciplinary and a more related manner. Okay. These are all correlated. So, again they have put it so beautiful. They said it is not only about content. The study, English studies, is not just about content, it is also about context, right. It is about context, it is about dissent, right. It is about revision, okay. Not just that content of a course or a syllabus has been established and you do not question it over the years, okay. And it is important that changes are brought primarily because of ideological dissent and the need to revise it, right. That is dismantling the canon and to make the newer canons. Smithson and Ruff put it as this, they call it English studies disputes, okay. English studies revises, it transforms what hitherto established methods, principles, theories and the scope of studying English language and literature. Okay. So, look at these words, disputing, revising, transforming, all these things, the methods, principles, theories and scope of what it means to be studied. And that is why apart from the capaciousness of English studies, we also note its dynamism. Okay. So, it is it's so dynamic that it keeps, it sort of makes the traditional English language and literature titles seem to be really devoid of any such exciting sort of changes that have taken place and that are being brought about by English studies, right. So, Smithson and Ruff says disputing, revising and transforming, these are some of the important activities in English studies. So, therefore, British literature, American literature, okay, world literatures in English, okay, that is a literature that has been written in English by writers in different parts of the world, and of course, the whole question of translations from English and from English and to English, to the English language. Okay, these are then some of the primary concerns of English studies, and to this I may add, it is related to the whole topic of world literature, the whole idea of comparative literature. Okay. The whole idea of comparative literature today sees a huge resurgence, a huge interest, and this is also because of the fact that English studies as a domain has been able to incorporate, okay, the comparative analyses of literature particularly through translation and the recognition of world literature, okay, as something that is worthy of being incorporated into syllabi. Then another aspect of English studies is its global dissemination. This is something that that has been recognized by, there are so many, I mean we have lectures on, for instance, global English, we have lectures on international English in this very module itself, international English, global English, the alchemy of English. I mean, you can look up for this whole the study of global dissemination of English, you can look up the work of, say, Braj Kachru, for instance. I mean, there are several lectures here in this module, but suffice it for us here to say that the means, okay, the aims, the strategies, the politics, okay, behind the global dissemination of both English language and literature. Okay. For instance, American English and how it has kind of how different it is, or how it is different from, how it is different from the so called standard English, Indian English, for instance. Then the use of English in global trade situations, in global economic situations, the use of English in a global, so called globalized world. These are some of the areas also that have been taken up in this this particular sub branch, if I may use the word, of English studies. The study of English, as I mentioned earlier, for special purposes, English as second language, etc. Okay, fine. So, let me next take you to another essay, quickly look at Franklin Court's introduction in the book Institutionalizing English Literature, Culture and Politics of Literary Studies 1750 to 1900. I mean, look at the words, these are words that will keep coming up over and over again. The whole issue of how English, the study of English literature is institutionalized. These are not decisions that are devoid of politics. They are not decisions that are devoid of economics. Okay, he calls it the culture and politics of literary study, and let us read from this. The historical development of English literary study in Britain and the United States is different. Now, we talked about through Gauri Vishwanathan's Marks of Conquest, we talked about in English and English literature study in institutionalized in India. Court refers to the difference in you could say motivation, for instance, as far as English literary study is concerned, the difference between that in England and in America. And let us read this. The historical development of English literary study in Britain and the United States is different. The inherently class conscious, look at this, the inherently class conscious and racially ethnic character of British education produced a discipline far more explicitly concerned with social and ethnographical issues than its American counterpart. Look at this very carefully. Okay? Court claims that the study of English literature in England, its impulse, so to speak, okay, its motivation, if you will, rests on the important issue of class, okay, of class consciousness in literature, okay, and the racially ethnic character of British education, right. Therefore, the discipline called English literary study, right, becomes more ethnographically and socially motivated, okay, or the approach is more social, based on this, on issues sociological or social and ethnographic, right. And then he contrasts this with the study of English literature in America, and he says, let us look for the answer here. He says the wars for legitimating the study in the United States were fought primarily in institutions for higher learning. Okay? So, the impulse is on what historically on what institutions look for, right. The changes happen not so much with regard to to social, for instance, issues of social stratification or issues of race, for instance, in the United States, not so much that at least directly as compared to England, but due to some due to some institutional needs. Let us look at this again. The wars for legitimating the study in the United States were fought primarily in institutions for higher learning, making the formative years of English literary study here, see, more of a cultural hybrid. Look at this. This is class conscious and racially ethnic, right. On the other hand, here at least in the formative years, the impulse was towards cultural hybridity, fine. More of a cultural hybrid, a blend of American curricular experimentation, look at this word, curricular experimentation, and contrast it to what happens in England. A blend of American curricular experimentation with the distant but established authority of English intellectual tradition. So, this whole question of revising happens here, okay? Question of revising, even if it is with a view to view to the necessity, so to speak, of encouraging cultural hybridity, of recognizing different different ethnic ethnic groups or and races, and for instance African American writing, for instance, of Hispanic writing, for instance. So, there is this what should I say, maybe I can use the word, this desire for cultural hybridity that at least in the formative years, okay, was an important impulse in in revising what he calls here the already established authority of the English tradition, in the intellectual tradition. Okay. By contrast, let us read, by contrast, the rise of English studies in Britain is more clearly implicated in examinations of its political and social history. Okay. So, this is an extremely important, to me an extremely important insight that is given to us by Franklin Court. Okay. So, the difference in impulse and motivation in in the institutionalization, okay, of English literary studies in the home country and in the second home country in the United States, right. So, I am referring again to one such important person, one such important figure in this whole, as I said, the hybridity impulse, the cultural impulse. In fact, the word culture studies was coined by her, and she is Gayatri Chakraborty Spivak. Many of you have heard of her, and in her book In Other Worlds, published in 1987, this is what she says. Okay, I am attempting to suggest our pedagogic responsibility in this situation. Okay. So, the scholars during those times took it upon us as a responsibility in in teaching and devising and revising curricula, okay, in forming and reformulating the canons, for instance. So, she says I am in during that time, historically if you look at it, this is what they felt and has been articulated by Spivak. I am attempting to suggest our pedagogic responsibility in this situation, to ask not merely how literary studies more correctly, look at this. Now, you understand this, okay? Gayatri Chakraborty Spivak as a faculty in an American university, definitely referring to the institutionalization, okay, of literary study as a universitarian discipline, okay, as something happening in the university. And look at what Court says here, right? Okay, the wars for legitimating the study of the English literature in the United States were fought primarily in institutions of higher learning, that is the university. Okay, and here is Spivak saying, agreeing that she and other such faculty okay, recognized the importance of taking up this pedagogical responsibility to ask not merely how literary studies or the university discipline of English studies can adjust to social demands, but also how we could look at this, this is the revision that happens in the US, by changing some of our assumptions, contribute towards changing those demands in the long run. So, the university curriculum is seen by Spivak and the people who are revising the curriculum there was seen as a very important, it's not that you wait for social change and that sort of begins to slowly seep into the university, but it is seen as a responsibility. So, she says here, by changing some of our assumptions, contribute towards changing those demands in the long run. So, there is even a proactive, if I may use the word, a proactive role that is sought by says what Court calls the institutions of higher learning in the United States, okay, towards social change. Okay. Then finally, Macaulay's Minute on Indian Education, and I will briefly touch upon this because this is something that will be core to another lecture, which is the last lecture in module 2. Module 2, as you know, is devoted to the history of the English language, and that module ends with a lecture on English in India, okay, historically, okay, the introduction and the growth development of English, both language and literature in India. I will end today's lecture by a brief a reference to Macaulay's Minute on Indian Education, and which is symptomatic really of the colonialist enterprise as far as introducing English language and literature was concerned. Okay. So, this is Macaulay in his minute. We have to educate a people who cannot at present be educated by means of their mother tongue. We must teach them some foreign language. The claims of our own language it is hardly necessary to recapitulate. Is talking about the English language. It stands preeminent even among the languages of the West. It abounds with works of imagination not inferior to the noblest which Greece has bequeathed to us, with models of every species of eloquence, with historical compositions which, considered merely as narratives, have seldom been surpassed, and which, considered, look at this, as vehicles of ethical and political instruction, have never been equaled. So, in this whole celebration of the English language, okay, which the high claims being made by Macaulay, even as he is doing that in his minute, he also, at least in the end of this passage as is seen, he talks about the fact that even as a political tool, okay, or tool for politics and ethics of morals, okay, the English language according to him is unsurpassed and unequaled. And in the lecture on English in India, we shall see how this was used, or English and English literature, okay, the introduction of English literature in India during the colonial times was a political move, and this is also something that is mentioned by Macaulay in his minute. I have more slides on the minute which I will not use now, and I will save it for that lecture in the second module. And we do not have much time really, and I will quickly do a recap by way recap of this lecture by raising or letting you know of some of the ways in which you may have questions about questions may be formulated in your exams. Okay. For instance, what did we talk about in this lecture? It was the scope of English studies, and you may get a question like how is there any difference between English studies and English language and literature? Okay, that is the study of English language and literature, and you would say yes. Many consider English language and literature, the study of English language and literature as the title as symptomatic of a more canonized and traditional way of of studying the subject, whereas English studies is a far more capacious or commodious domain, which includes chiefly of course the study of English, the English study of the English language, of English literature, but not only as something that emanates from Britain. Okay. As world literature is written in English, okay, and of translations, right. It also includes the study of English that is used in journalism, study of the philosophy of language as applied to English, study of media, of film, of communication, of cultural studies, right, of could be study of definitely of law, okay, of publishing, of digital publishing, for instance, the digital world, all these, and also not the least important, which is the study of ways and strategies of proficiency in the English language. And we have seen, we may also point to the study of ESL or English, as a second language, or English for special purposes, right. Comparative studies of first language and second language, English as a first language and second language, and finally, the whole question of the global dissemination of English, both as a language and its literary forms. Okay. So, you may say that yes, definitely scholars are more and more pressing that English studies be the title that is and to replace English language and literature, though we still have title our entire course English language and literature, because we are not talking about, for instance, we do not have modules on the proficiency of learning, teaching and learning English. Okay, this is something which is missing from our course syllabus and been taken up by other courses in NPTEL. Right. It is not that we are not aware of this, but we finally chose to call it English language and literature, because see, for instance, we have modules on the history of English, and in the module of the history of English language, we are focusing apart from the fact that we have English in India, a lecture on English in India, we are focusing on, say, the development of the English language as it happened in England. Okay. In Britain, we are not looking at that elsewhere. Okay. And because of that, because of this gap or lacuna, we have also to make up for it, included lectures such as in this module, the alchemy of English, or international English, or the globalization of English. Okay. So, this is really our defense of why we, for instance, again on the different periods of English literature, we refer quite traditionally, I may say, to the age of Milton, or the age of Shakespeare, and to the Victorians, etc., without talking about the development, growth development, and different periods, if we may say, of English literature in English in other countries. Okay. So, we finally settle for English language and literature, and let me again remind you, it is not because we are not aware of the importance, the pedagogical and ideological importance of English studies. Okay. Then you may also get a question like how or which discipline was also responsible for creating this influence on the on the ideological point of view, and you refer to culture studies. Okay, the polemical strain in cultural studies leads to what Smithson and Rough has called the revising of, and then you get another, you may have another question, get another question like, for instance, what are the things that are according to Smithson and Rough that are disputed, revised. Okay, then it is entire the methods, the principles, okay, the themes, right, that are there sorry, that have been existing as far as English language, study of English language and literature are concerned. Then when you, if you ask a question on, give for instance, what is the irony of English literature, historical irony of English literature, as a university discipline. You say that the irony is, according to scholars like Gauri Vishwanathan, that English as a department, you know, or a department really, or say a discipline belonging to formal education, taught formally as part of, you know, of education, did not happen in the home country. Okay. The study of English literature was almost peripheral in the English departments up to the 19th century, and we have enough proof of this here in our lecture. Up to the 19th century, because the more important things were study of philology, the study of grammar, the study of rhetoric and oratory. It was only in the colonies and in India we see English literature being used as a political tool, which we found in sorry, we will find in Macaulay's Minute, right. So, here we come to the end of our lecture on the scope of English studies, you may wait for other lectures that are there which will throw more light on this scope. Sorry, I have only outlined the scope here. So, let us end this lecture here with the promise that more of this, for instance, especially if you are interested in English in India, will be taken up in module number 2. Thank you so much.